Welcome to Daily Life in the Past. Here, we explore how ordinary people lived before modern technology and comfort shaped everyday life. If you enjoy learning about the past, feel free to leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from. And if you would like to support the channel, a like or subscription is always appreciated. When we picture the past, it is easy to focus on wars, kings, inventions, and big events. But most of human history was made of ordinary days. People woke up, worked, ate, rested, and slept. They repeated that pattern across seasons and across generations. This video explains how work, meals, and rest were balanced before modern schedules, electric lighting, and today's labor rules. The goal is not to describe one typical day for everyone, because no single day fit all people. Instead, we will explain the main systems that shaped daily priorities in different times and places. Across history, daily life was organized by a few powerful limits. First, light. Before cheap artificial lighting, most work happened in daylight. Darkness changed what was possible. Second, weather and season. Heat, cold, rain, and harvest times pushed work and rest into different patterns. Third, food supply. Meals were not just personal choices. They depended on farming cycles, storage, and the cost of fuel for cooking. Fourth, social organization. A household, a village, a temple, an estate, a workshop, an army unit, or a monastery, each had its own rules. And finally, technology. A hand tool, a plow team, a water wheel, a sailing ship, or a steam engine, each demanded different rhythms. With those limits in mind, we can look at how societies arranged their days. In farming societies, work and rest followed the land. For most people in most centuries, farming was the main job. Even many town workers depended on farm production. In farming life, work was not evenly spread across the year. Some seasons were extremely busy. Others were quieter. In many regions, the most demanding periods were planting and harvest. During harvest, timing mattered. If grain, grapes, or other crops were not gathered quickly, weather and spoilage could destroy the year's food and income. That pressure could temporarily push people into longer work days. But even in hard seasons, the workday did not usually look like a modern 8 hours, then leisure. Instead, work was often broken into blocks, separated by meals, short rests, tool sharpening, animal care, and travel between fields. The start of the day often depended on sunrise. Many tasks were easiest in the cool morning: walking long distances, cutting, digging, carrying, and other heavy work. In hot climates and in summer months, a midday slowdown was practical. It was not always a formal nap. It could be a pause, a lighter task, or time in shade. The end of the day often depended on sunset. After dark, outdoor work became harder and more dangerous. People shifted toward indoor tasks, repairing gear, processing food, spinning fiber, mending clothing, and planning the next day. So the balance was not work versus rest in a simple way. It was a full-day cycle of effort, recovery, and preparation. Meals were timed around work, fuel, and digestion. Modern people often think of 3 daily meals as normal: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But across history, the number and size of meals varied. In many European settings for long periods, 2 main meals were common: a larger midday meal and a lighter evening meal. A small early bite could exist too, but it was not always treated as a formal meal in elite writing. In other places and times, workers ate something early before leaving, then ate again during the day. The key point is that meal timing followed practical needs. One practical issue was cooking fuel. Heating a large pot took time and resources. Many households cooked in ways that stretched fuel: stews, porridges, and breads that could be baked in batches. Another issue was digestion during heavy labor. A very heavy meal before intense physical work could slow a person down. so some groups preferred a smaller early meal and a larger meal after a block of work. A third issue was storage and spoilage. Before refrigeration, foods had to be eaten quickly or preserved. That shaped what was available for each meal. And finally, social rules mattered. Religious fasting days, local customs, and workplace expectations could all control when and what people ate. Rest did not always mean free time. Rest in the past often meant recovery time rather than entertainment. Many people lived close to the edge of hunger or illness. Rest was needed so bodies could continue working. Rest could happen in small pieces, sitting while tools were repaired, pausing when animals needed watering, stopping work during the hottest part of the day, or resting during storms. Rest could also happen as seasonal relief. In some farming areas, winter reduced field labor, but that did not always mean leisure. People still had to feed animals, fix buildings, spin thread, weave cloth, and manage stored food. In other words, the rest part of the year could become the maintenance part of the year. Sleep patterns were shaped by darkness and household life. Before electric lights, darkness limited what could be done safely. That often encouraged earlier sleep, especially in rural areas. But sleep was not always one solid block. In many historical settings, people could wake during the night. A wakeful period might be used for tending fires, checking animals, praying, or quiet household tasks. Nighttime was not always treated as wasted time, because it was normal for sleep to be interrupted by noise, cold, and shared sleeping spaces. Also, sleep depended on class and job. A person guarding a city wall, working on a ship, or serving in a household might sleep at different times than a farmer. Now, let us look at several major historical settings to see how these systems worked. Ancient Egypt, work organized by rations and state projects. In ancient Egypt, especially in state-run building and craft projects, daily life could be organized by a ration system. Large projects needed steady labor, and the administration had to supply food. Bread and beer were major staples. Beer in this context was also a source of calories and nutrition. Grain rations could be issued to workers and their families. For labor commanded by major institutions, such as royal construction, the work rhythm was connected to deliveries of grain and other supplies. When supplies failed, workers could not simply wait it out easily. Missing rations meant hunger. That fact shows how tightly meals and work could be linked through an administrative system. Work on state projects was planned and scheduled. The day could be divided into work periods, with breaks driven by heat and the need to eat and drink. Water access mattered greatly, and provisioning had to be organized, especially in dry areas. In villages tied to specialized work, like tomb-building communities, food distribution was part of the labor contract. The balance of work and meals was not mainly personal preference. It was a managed system. This also shows something important. In many early states, the daily schedule of workers was controlled through food. If an institution provided the grain, it had power over time. Ancient Rome, urban time, business mornings, and changing meal customs. In ancient Rome, daily rhythms differed by class and by whether a person did manual labor. For many workers, the day still followed daylight. Manual labor in streets, docks, and construction depended on light. Many people ate a simple early meal and a midday meal. A main meal could be earlier than in many modern cultures. For wealthier Romans, daily organization could center on social obligations and public life. Business and official duties were often handled in the morning. People might attend meetings, handle legal matters, or visit patrons and clients. After that, there could be time for bathing and then a longer meal. Over time, in some Roman circles, the main meal shifted later. This change shows that meal timing is not fixed. It can move as work patterns and social habits change. In Rome, city life also created other daily pressures. Markets had hours, crowded housing, and shared spaces affected sleep and privacy. Noise, heat, and the need to fetch water could shape when people rested. So, in a city, the balance of work, meals, and rest was not just about farming and daylight. It was also about public schedules, commerce, and dense living. Medieval Europe, fieldwork, two main meals, and household production. In medieval Europe, most people were tied to agriculture in some way. Even those in towns depended on farm supply and rural labor. The daily work balance for peasants and smallholders depended heavily on season. During key months, long days in the fields were common. But the long day was still built out of segments: early start, a pause for food, more work, then evening tasks. Meals often followed a pattern of a main midday dinner and a lighter supper. A morning meal might exist in practice, especially for people doing heavy labor, but it could be treated differently in written sources because of social and religious ideas about fasting. Food for many households centered on grains. Bread was important, but so were potages and stews, which could combine grain, vegetables, and small amounts of meat or fat when available. Ale or other fermented drinks were common in many areas, partly because brewing could make grain calories easier to consume, and because clean water access varied. Rest was shaped by the household economy. Many tasks were done at home after field work: grinding grain, making bread, feeding animals, preserving food, spinning, weaving, and repairing tools. For many families, free time was limited, but rest still existed as pauses within labor and as reduced field activity in certain seasons. Monasteries, a formal schedule dividing work, meals, and sleep. One of the clearest historical examples of planned daily balance comes from monastic life. In many monasteries influenced by the rule of St. Benedict, the day was structured around set times of prayer and work. The schedule divided the day into blocks, often including manual labor, reading or study, communal prayer, and meals. The rule also aimed for moderation. Sleep was treated as necessary. Meals were regulated, and meal timing could change with the season. In some parts of the year, the main meal might be at midday with a lighter supper. In other periods, fasting practices could reduce meals or shift them later. This is important because it shows a different kind of time system than a farm. A monastery used the clock of ritual and community rules, not just the clock of weather. It also shows that daily balance could be designed on purpose. Leaders could decide how much time to give to work and how much to give to rest and food within the limits of season and health. Early modern Europe, mealtimes shift, work stays tied to light. In early modern Europe, especially from the 1500s onward, daily organization began to change in some places. In towns, more people worked in crafts, trade, shipping, and services. Work could still follow daylight, but markets and workshops introduced more regular hours. Mealtimes also shifted over centuries. In some regions, the main meal, called dinner, gradually moved later. This did not happen everywhere at once, and it did not affect all classes the same way. Among working people, meal timing still had to support energy needs for physical labor. Among wealthier groups, meal timing could be influenced by social fashion, visiting schedules, and household staffing. Rest and sleep were still influenced by limited lighting. Candles and lamps existed, but they cost money and required fuel. For many households, that meant evenings were shorter and quieter. So even as cities grew and trade expanded, the old limits remained strong: light, season, and fuel. The Industrial Revolution, time discipline, long shifts, and regulated breaks. A major change came with industrial factory work. In factories, work was less tied to the sun and more tied to machines, supervisors, and profit. When machines were expensive, owners often wanted them running as many hours as possible. That pressure produced long work days in many early industrial settings. Shifts could start very early. Work could be loud, repetitive, and physically demanding in a new way. Meals and rest in this system were often reduced to short breaks. Instead of eating when a task allowed it, workers ate when the schedule allowed it. Over time, laws and regulations began to address hours and breaks, especially for children and apprentices. Early factory laws in Britain, for example, limited working hours for some groups and required certain meal breaks. These rules show that industrial work created a new problem. When time is controlled by an employer and a machine, rest must often be protected by policy rather than custom. Industrial cities also changed sleep. Crowded housing, shift work, and noise could reduce rest. Gas lighting and later electric lighting extended the usable day. This made it easier to work late, but it also made it easier for work to expand into hours that were once naturally protected by darkness. This is one of the biggest historical turning points in daily balance. Key systems that organized everyday priorities. Across these periods, we can summarize the main systems that shaped how people balanced work, meals, and rest. 1. Daylight and season as the basic schedule. For most of history, the sun acted like a universal clock. Work expanded in summer and contracted in winter. People often rose early because light was valuable, and heat could be dangerous later. 2F as both fuel and control. Meals were not just about hunger. They were about managing energy for labor and managing limited supplies. In some systems, especially state or institutional labor, food rations linked directly to work expectations. If an authority controlled grain, it could control time. 3. Household labor as a second workday. Even when field or shop work ended, household tasks continued. Food processing, cleaning, clothing production, and repairs were necessary for survival. This means that many people's rest time was not an open space. It was filled with different kinds of work. 4. Community rules, religion and custom fasting days, feast days, and community expectations shaped meal timing and rest. In some settings, starting to eat too early could be criticized in moral terms, even if workers did it in practice. In structured communities like monasteries, daily balance could be planned and enforced. 5. Urbanization and industrialization create clock-based life. As towns grew and industrial work expanded, time became more standardized. Work hours could be fixed by employers, bells, and later clocks. This changed meal and rest patterns. Breaks became schedules rather than flexible. Sleep could be affected by night work and artificial light. What balance meant in historical terms? It is important to define what balance meant in the past. In modern discussions, balance often suggests personal choice, deciding how to divide time between job, meals, family, and leisure. In many historical societies, balance was less about choice and more about survival within limits. Work had to match the season and the food supply. Meals had to match what could be grown, stored, and cooked. Rest had to match what the body required, but also what the household could afford in time. And sleep had to match darkness, noise, shared space, and safety. So the daily priorities were usually practical. First priority, secure food and basic materials. Second priority, maintain tools, animals, and shelter. Third priority, meet obligations to landlords, states, temples, guilds, or employers. And throughout, protect health enough to keep working. Even in systems with harsh demands, people still created pauses and routines. They used short rests, shared meals, and seasonal rhythms to recover. Closing view, continuity and change. When we step back, we can see both continuity and change. The continuity is that people always had to manage energy. Meals and rest were always tied to work because the human body has limits. The change is how time was controlled. In many farming and household economies, Time was shaped by nature and by community custom. It could be demanding, but it was often flexible in small ways. In industrial systems, time was increasingly shaped by machines and employers. That made the day more regular, but it could also make it less humane unless rules or bargaining protected breaks and sleep. Understanding these older systems helps explain why modern schedules feel normal today. They are not just personal habits. They are the result of long changes in technology, economy, and social control over time. That is, the long history behind something that seems simple: when people worked, when they ate, and when they rested.